She smiled at me like nothing had ever happened, like the words she spoke that night had never cut into me, like my heart had not carried them quietly every single day after. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The window was slightly open, and I could hear a bird outside, singing like it was any other morning. She walked in, brushed past me, and said, "Good morning," in a calm voice. No pause, no hesitation, no memory in her eyes. I nodded and answered her back. My voice sounded normal, even to me, but inside, something folded in on itself. I realized then that people don't always remember the pain they cause, but the ones who are hurt, we remember everything. I didn't ask her about that night. I didn't remind her of the tears I cried alone in my room. I didn't tell her how I replayed her words over and over while staring at the ceiling. I just stood there, listening to the sound of the kettle, pretending I was fine. That was the hardest part, not the silence, not the distance. It was the pretending. She pretended nothing happened, and I pretended I was okay. Some mornings I would sit at the small table before everyone woke up. The house felt different then. Quiet, honest. I could let my shoulders relax. I could admit to myself that something inside me had changed. Love was still there, yes, but it had learned how to be careful. I never wanted an argument. I never wanted to choose sides. I just wanted peace. Still, peace sometimes asks us to swallow hurt without making a sound. And I did that, slowly, day after day. This is the story of how I learned that forgetting is easy for some people, but remembering is something the heart does all on its own. Before all of this, my life was simple, not perfect, just steady. I believed that kindness, patience, and love would always be enough. My son had always been a gentle boy. Even as a child, he didn't like raised voices. He listened more than he spoke. When he met her, I saw how happy he was, and that happiness became important to me too. When he brought her home for the first time, she was polite, well-spoken, and careful with her words. I remember thinking, she seems strong. Maybe she will balance him. At the beginning, we got along well. We talked in the kitchen while I cooked. She told me about her work, her childhood, her fears about the future. I listened. I always listened. I thought that was what love looked like. The house felt warm in those days, not because it was big or fancy, but because it was full. Full of routines, full of shared meals, full of quiet understanding. Or at least I believed it was. I tried not to interfere in their life together. I had already lived my share of years. I didn't want control. I wanted harmony. But harmony is delicate, and often you don't hear it breaking until it's already gone. In those early years, I found comfort in small things. The morning light that fell across the kitchen floor. The sound of plates being set on the table. The way my son would thank me quietly after dinner, even when he was tired. She and I shared the space of the home, but we carried it differently. To me, the house was a place of keeping memories, keeping peace, keeping each other safe from the world outside. To her, I think the house was more about moving forward, plans, schedules, goals, and I respected that. I truly did. I told myself that every woman runs a home in her own way, and that love means learning when to step back. So I stepped back often. I tried to be light in the room, quiet, useful but not present too much. I learned which cupboards she preferred,
which days she liked silence, which days she welcomed conversation. Sometimes she would sit across from me at the table, scrolling on her phone, and I would just watch her face. Not in judgment, just curiosity. I wondered what thoughts passed through her mind, if she ever felt overwhelmed, if she ever felt lonely. Once, while we were folding laundry, she said, "You're very patient." I smiled and replied, "Life teaches you that." She nodded but didn't ask more. My son trusted me to keep things calm. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed when I handled disagreements gently. If there was confusion, I softened it. If there was tension, I smoothed it out. That had always been my role in life. I didn't complain, I adjusted.
But patience has a quiet cost. Not at once, just a little, each time you tell yourself your feelings can wait. Over time, the house began to feel different at certain hours. Mornings were peaceful, almost tender. Evenings felt tighter, like everyone was holding something in. Dinner conversations grew shorter, not empty, just careful. Questions asked politely, answers given politely, no one staying too long in the moment. I noticed that she would sometimes clean in silence, fast and focused, as if trying to make order out of more than just the space around her. If I offered help, she would say, "It's okay, I've got it," without looking up. I stopped insisting. In the evenings, I would return to my room early. I told myself I needed rest. But really, I was giving space. Space is a language too. I just wasn't sure who was hearing it. There were good days still. Days when we laughed over burnt toast. Days when she asked me for advice about a recipe. Days when I thought, see, we're fine. But something fragile had already been placed between us, even if neither of us named it. I remember one afternoon especially. It was raining lightly, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself loudly, just steady, patient. She sat by the window, arms folded, watching the rain. I brought her a cup of tea without asking. I placed it on the table beside her. She looked at it and said softly, "Thank you." Her voice was polite, distant. I waited for more, a smile, a question, anything. Nothing came. I walked away feeling heavier than before. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how relationships don't always break with loud arguments. Sometimes they thin out quietly, like fabric worn down by time. I wondered if she felt crowded, or judged, or misunderstood. And I wondered if I was beginning to feel invisible in a place I once called home. Still, I said nothing, because speaking up felt risky, and silence felt safer. At least that's what I told myself then. The first moment that truly stayed with me happened over something very small. So small that, on its own, it might not seem important. I had rearranged the kitchen shelves one afternoon, not because I wanted to control anything, but because I thought it might make things easier. The heavier plates closer to the counter, the cups nearer the kettle. Simple logic, born from years of habit. When she came home and noticed it, she stopped in the doorway. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She simply stood there a little too long. "I liked it the way it was," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, just firm. I nodded right away. I said, "I can put it back." She sighed quietly. "It's fine. I'll change it later." That was all. I went back to my room, my hands feeling oddly empty. I sat on the bed for a long time, wondering why something so small made my chest feel tight. From then on,
I became extra careful. I stopped touching things that weren't mine. I cleaned only my space. I asked before doing anything, even things I had done freely before. Is it okay if I cook today? Do you need anything from the store? Would you like me to watch the pot while you rest? She always answered politely, but the warmth that once filled those exchanges was gone. I started noticing looks instead of words, a glance at the clock if I stayed in the living room too long, a pause before answering me, silence that stretched just a little too far. I told myself it was stress, work, life, fatigue. I made excuses for her in my head again and again. But the body notices things before the mind is ready to accept them. I ate less at dinner. I spoke less. I laughed more softly. Even my footsteps became quieter, as if sound itself might upset the fragile peace of the house. My son noticed, I think. Sometimes he would ask, "Are you okay, Mom?" I would smile and say, "Just tired." It was easier than telling the truth. One evening, I overheard them talking in the other room. Not arguing, just speaking in low voices. I couldn't hear all the words, but I heard my name. That was enough. I didn't lean closer. I didn't listen further. I returned to my room and closed the door gently. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound felt louder in the dark. Every thought felt heavier. I kept thinking about how love changes shape over time, how sometimes it grows quieter, and sometimes it grows careful. A few days later, there was an incident I still replay in my mind. I had left a note on the kitchen counter. Just a small one. "I'll be out for a walk. Back soon." When I returned, the note was gone. Later that evening, she said, "You don't have to leave notes. This isn't a hostel." She didn't say it harshly, but she didn't smile either. "I just didn't want you to worry," I replied. She shrugged. "It's fine." That word again. Fine. The word people use when they don't want to talk. After that, I stopped leaving notes. Days passed like this. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a slow shift, like furniture moved in the dark. You don't trip over it right away, but you know the room isn't the same. Sometimes she would act as if everything was normal. She would ask about my day. She would thank me for something. And I would feel hope rise in me again. Then, just as quickly, it would settle back down. I started doubting myself. Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining things? I remembered my younger self, how I once promised I would never be a burden to anyone, that if I ever felt unwelcome, I would quietly remove myself. That promise echoed louder with each passing day. One evening, while we were washing dishes together, she broke the silence. "You know," she said, eyes on the sink, "I'm used to doing things on my own." I dried a plate and nodded. "I understand." She paused, as if waiting for something more. But nothing came. We finished the dishes in silence, the sound of water between us. That was the moment I realized something inside me had begun to brace itself. Not to fight, not to argue, just to endure. I still loved her. I truly did. But love, when it isn't welcomed, learns how to sit quietly in the corner. I didn't know then that all of this was leading somewhere, that these small moments were collecting themselves. Waiting. The night everything changed did not announce itself. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no sharp words thrown across the room. It came softly,
and that somehow hurt the most. It was late evening. The house felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was tired. The television was on, but no one was really watching. My son sat on one end of the couch. She sat on the other. I stood near the doorway, not sure whether to sit or return to my room. That hesitation had become familiar. "I'll make some tea," I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. She didn't answer. In the kitchen, the kettle took longer than usual to boil. Or maybe it just felt that way. My hands moved slowly. I listened to the quiet hum of the house and felt something press against my chest. When I returned with the cups, she looked up briefly and said, "I didn't ask for tea." I stopped. "Oh," I said gently. I said I didn't ask." She repeated, not loudly, just clearly. My son looked up then. "It's okay, Mom," he said quickly. "I'll have some." She didn't say anything else. She stood up and walked toward the bedroom. I placed both cups on the table. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with my hands. My son watched me, concern in his eyes. "It's fine," I said. "She's probably tired." But inside, something cracked. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling. I replayed the scene over and over. The words weren't cruel, but they were firm, closed, final. Sometime after midnight, I heard their bedroom door open, then quiet voices. I wasn't trying to listen, but walls are thin at night. "I feel uncomfortable," she said. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this." My heart began to pound. "She's my mother," my son replied softly. "I know," she said, "but I need space." There was a pause, a long one. "I don't want to say something I'll regret," she continued, "but I feel like I can't breathe." That word stayed with me. Breathe. I pressed my hand against my chest. I felt like I was the one struggling to breathe. No one mentioned my name again. Maybe they didn't need to. I already knew. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was still dark. I moved quietly, as I always did now. I sat at the small table and held my cup of tea between my hands. My thoughts were calm, strangely calm. This was the moment I had been preparing for, without realizing it. When she came into the kitchen later, she looked tired. Her hair was tied back. Her face was closed, but not angry. "I think we need to talk," she said. I nodded. "All right." She sat down across from me. She took a breath. "I don't want things to be uncomfortable," she said, "but I need my own space, my own home, my own way of doing things." I listened. I didn't interrupt. "This isn't about disrespect," she continued. I didn't expect this to be so hard." I waited. I thought maybe she'd say more. Maybe she'd acknowledge the way things had been said, the way they had landed. She didn't. "I think it will be better if you stayed somewhere else for a while," she finished. The room went very quiet. I nodded slowly. I felt my lips curve into a polite smile. "I understand," I said. And I meant it, or at least part of me did. I stood up and began clearing the table. My hands were steady. My heart was not. My son came in too late to stop anything. He looked at me, then at her. His mouth opened, then closed.
"I'll pack later," I said gently. "There's no rush." She nodded. "Thank you for understanding." That was it. No apology, no softness, no acknowledgement of the quiet pain that had built up over months. Just understanding. Expected. Assumed. That afternoon, I packed my things slowly. A few clothes, a few books, photos I couldn't leave behind. I paused often, letting memories pass through my hands. When I left the room for the last time, I looked back at the bed, the window, the familiar shape of the space. I closed the door quietly. She stood near the front door when I left. My son stood beside her, silent. "Take care," she said. "You too," I replied. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a soft click. And just like that, I was no longer part of the house I had called home. The first night away felt unreal. Not painful in a sharp way, just hollow. I stayed in the small room that had once felt familiar, but that night even the walls felt unsure of me. I set my bag down beside the bed and sat for a long time without turning on the light. The silence was different here. Not heavy, just empty. I lay down fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. The darkness gave me permission to feel everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not anger, just sadness. A deep, quiet sadness that didn't ask for words. I wondered how she had fallen asleep that night. If she felt relief, if she felt guilt, or if she simply felt nothing at all. In the morning, I woke early as usual. Habits don't leave easily. I reached for my phone out of instinct, then stopped myself. I didn't know who I was supposed to check in with anymore. So I made tea. I sat by the window. I watched the day begin without me in it. The days that followed were slow. I kept busy on purpose. I organized drawers that didn't need organizing. I went for walks, even when my legs were tired. I chose routes that required attention so my thoughts wouldn't wander too far. But they always wandered back. I replayed her words, not the ones she said aloud, but the ones she didn't. The apology that never came. The understanding that was expected but never returned. I realized then how deeply words matter and how deeply their absence can stay. My son called often at first. His voice was careful, like he didn't know where to place his feet anymore. "Mom, how are you doing?" he asked. "I'm all right," I told him. And with time, that answer became more honest. He never asked me to come back, and he never told me not to. I didn't ask either. We both stayed suspended in that quiet space between before and after. Weeks passed. The sharpness softened, not because things were resolved, but because time has a way of wrapping pain in routine until it becomes lighter to carry.
One afternoon, I received a message from her. Just one line. "I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen for a long time. There it was, concern, but still no apology. My fingers hovered above the reply. I thought about everything I could say, everything I had practiced in my head. Instead, I typed, "I'm doing fine. I hope you are too." And I meant it. I surprised myself with that. I realized then that healing doesn't always look like closure. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace in small, quiet moments. Over time, the tension loosened. Conversations became easier. Short visits happened carefully at first, like stepping onto thin ice. I noticed she avoided certain topics. I did too. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if time alone had erased the discomfort. And maybe, for her, it had. But my heart remembered. It remembered the careful words, the slow retreat, the door closing softly behind me. Still, something inside of me had changed, not hardened, just steadied. I no longer waited for her apology. Waiting had cost me enough. Instead, I focused on how I wanted to live my remaining years, with honesty, with grace, and with boundaries that didn't need explanation. Forgiveness came slowly, not as a grand decision, but as a series of small ones. Each time I chose not to hold her past words against her present self. Each time I let kindness speak where disappointment once lived. We rebuilt something different. Not what it was before, but something quieter, simpler, more truthful. And that was enough. Some things never get spoken aloud. They settle instead, into memory, into the body, into the quiet places where no one else can hear them. Even now, I can still remember the sound of that door closing behind me. Not loud, not angry, just final. And I've learned that the soft moments often leave the deepest marks. She still smiles at me the same way, calm, polite, as if time smoothed everything over. And in many ways, it did. But not by erasing what happened, only by teaching me how to carry it without letting it weigh me down. I no longer expect an apology. I no longer wait for her to acknowledge that night. Because sometimes people cannot give what they do not know how to offer, and waiting for it can quietly take years from your heart. What I learned instead is this: peace does not always come from being understood. Sometimes it comes from understanding yourself. I understand now that love does not mean disappearing, that patience does not mean silence, that kindness does not mean leaving yourself behind. I gave what I could. I stayed gentle. I stayed respectful. And when it was time to step back, I did so without anger. That matters to me. My relationship with my son remains tender. Changed, yes, but honest. We don't talk about that time often. We don't need to. Love learned how to bend without breaking. And with her, I keep things light, warm but measured, open but grounded. I don't reach for what is not offered, and I don't apologize for the space I now keep within myself. My heart remembers everything, but it no longer feels heavy. If someone listening to this has ever been hurt quietly, pushed aside gently, or expected to understand without being understood in return, I want you to know this: you are allowed to remember. You are allowed to forgive without forgetting. You are allowed to choose peace even when you never received the apology you deserved. Life does not always close its chapters neatly. Sometimes it leaves a page slightly folded, the words still visible if you look closely. And that's okay. What matters is how you turn the page. Tonight, if your heart is tired, let it rest. Let go of the need for perfect endings. Let kindness begin with yourself.
Some people move on by pretending nothing happened. Others move on by remembering and choosing to grow anyway. This is how I chose to live.